On July 1, 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge opened as the third longest suspension bridge on Earth. Its main span stretched 2,800 feet across Puget Sound, a ribbon of steel and concrete that seemed to float between the towers. Workers had already given it a nickname, Galloping Gertie, because even in a light breeze the deck rose and fell in slow, sickening waves. Drivers felt their stomachs lurch. The bridge was alive, and not in a way anyone wanted. The engineers had celebrated their own cleverness. Leon Moisseiff's design was lighter, cheaper, more elegant than anything before it. A slender deck, solid plate girders, a span-to-width ratio so extreme it looked like a tightrope. But these choices were not genius. They were a physics trap, hidden in plain sight. The bridge was rated for winds near 100 miles per hour. It would fail at 40. Not a hurricane, a stiff afternoon breeze. So if the math said it was strong, why did the road itself heave and roll beneath every car that crossed? And what would the wind do on the day it simply refused to let go? Clark Eldridge drew the bridge first, heavy open steel trusses, thick and rigid, the kind that had carried trains for decades. $11 million. Leon Moisseiff looked at those trusses and saw waste. He was the leading voice of deflection theory, the idea that a bridge's own cables could do the stiffening if you let them. Strip the trusses away, he said. Replace them with shallow plate girders, solid walls of steel only 8 feet deep. Narrow the deck to 39 feet. Stretch the span to 2,800 feet, $6 million instead. A ribbon floating across the water. The bridge authority chose elegance and savings. A span-to-width ratio of 72:1, the slenderest ever attempted. What they did not choose was torsional stiffness. Those solid plate girders caught wind like airplane wings. The narrow deck had no resistance to twisting. On paper, a triumph. In the air, a weather vane waiting for the right gust. Approved in 1938. Open by July 1940. Drivers crossed a deck that breathed beneath them, rising and falling in slow hypnotic rolls. The engineers called it manageable, the public called it Gertie. And in the numbers, a critical flutter speed waited like a threshold already crossed without knowing. On opening day, drivers gripped their wheels as the deck rose beneath them in slow rolling waves. Locals laughed. They named her Galloping Gertie. Tourists came to ride the motion, but empty trucks lost their loads. By August, the Toll Bridge Authority hired Professor F. Bert Farquharson. He brought cameras, strain gauges, theories. His team bolted tie-down cables to the shore, then added inclined stay cables. The girders still moved. Each fix dampened the bounce for a day, maybe two. Then Gertie found her rhythm again. Farquharson filmed in color, measuring frequencies, logging wind speeds. The bridge swayed in winds as low as 3 or 4 miles per hour. In stronger gusts, the swing grew wider. Yet no one had seen it twist, not once. The engineers told themselves vertical motion, however unsettling, was not collapse. They were watching the wrong symptom. By early November, Farquharson's cameras sat ready. The dampers had failed again, and the forecast called for steady winds near 40 miles per hour. By dawn on November 7th, the deck heaved in slow, heavy waves. Drivers stayed home. Farquharson woke to a phone call. A workman said something had changed. He grabbed his camera and drove through grey morning. When he reached the towers, he looked up. The bridge was no longer bouncing, it was twisting. The deck rotated around its center line, one edge tilting up while the opposite plunged down. A full cycle every 5 seconds, 45 degrees from horizontal. Farquharson started filming. The motion was not dying, it was growing. Each twist fed the next, the steel girders acting like wings catching the wind, pulling energy from the same 40-mile-per-hour breeze that had only rattled windows an hour before. The bridge had found a frequency where it absorbed more from the wind than it could bleed away. Farquharson knew it immediately. This was not Galloping Gertie's old dance. This was something that hungered. The deck twisted again, each rotation steeper than the last. The energy had nowhere to go but into the steel itself, and somewhere above the water, a suspender cable was already reaching its limit. Farquharson watched the deck twist and understood what the girders were doing. Moisseiff's solid plates, chosen to save weight and money, had become crude airfoils. Wind struck them at an angle. That angle generated lift, not upward lift, twisting torque, rotating the deck further. Further rotation meant a steeper angle. Stronger lift, faster twisting. The bridge was pulling energy from the wind, feeding itself, amplifying every 5-second cycle. Engineers had looked for resonance, the familiar story of a singer shattering glass, but resonance needs an outside force matching a natural frequency. Flutter creates its own rhythm. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge had almost no torsional stiffness. Its critical flutter speed sat at roughly 40 miles per hour. The morning breeze had already crossed that threshold. Energy piled in faster than steel could shed it. The girders flexed, the cables stretched. Each cycle stored more violence than the one before. The bridge was no longer a structure. It was a runaway machine with unlimited fuel. And somewhere in that steel, something was about to give, a snapped cable, a buckled beam, or the deck itself tearing free. By 10 that morning, the deck was tilting 45 degrees each way. One edge pointed at the water, the other at the sky, then snapped back, every 5 seconds. Professor Farquharson stood on the shore filming color footage that would outlast the bridge itself. A suspender cable at mid-span had already slipped. The first fracture came quietly, a single strand parting, then more, then the whole cable let go. The deck, suddenly half-supported, whipped harder, concrete cracked. The steel girders, already dancing, began to tear. At 11:10, a 600-foot section of roadway broke free at the center. It hung there, twisting, then plunged into Puget Sound. The side spans followed, dropping into the water like drawn curtains. The towers stood empty, stripped of their purpose. One car had been abandoned on the span. Its owner fled, his cocker spaniel Tubby still inside. The dog was the only life lost. The bridge that had cost $6 million and 4 months of pride was now scrap and memory, but the film survived, and the questions were just beginning. The film survived, and so did the need to understand. Within days, the Federal Works Agency convened the Carmody Board. Theodore von Karman walked among them, an aerodynamicist who'd spent decades studying how moving air couples with moving structures. He walked the empty towers. He studied the film frame by frame. He built scale models at Caltech and watched them twist in wind tunnels. The popular story was resonance, wind vortices matching the bridge's natural rhythm, like a singer shattering glass. Von Karman proved it wrong. The true killer was aeroelastic flutter, a feedback loop where the deck's own twisting shaped the airflow, and the airflow drove the twisting harder. The bridge wasn't just vibrating in wind, it was harvesting energy from it, feeding on breeze that should have been harmless. The solid plate girders, chosen to save money, had acted as airfoils. The slender deck, celebrated as elegant, had been too flexible to survive its own design. The board's report, published in March 1941, rewrote the rules. Wind tunnel testing became mandatory for every long-span bridge. A decade later, the replacement bridge rose from the same towers. Open, stiffening trusses broke up the wind. The deck was wider, tested against flutter before a single cable was strung. Every suspension bridge built since carries that legacy in its bones. But structures keep growing more slender, more ambitious, more daring in their reach. And the wind is still out there, patient, waiting for any shape that forgets how quickly stillness can become a dance it cannot stop. In 1950, the new bridge opened on those same towers. The wind still blew at 40 miles per hour through the Narrows, the same breath that had once twisted steel into ribbon. But now the deck carried traffic in silence. Open trusses let the air slip through. Engineers had mapped every flutter mode in wind tunnels before the first cable drew tight. The old bridge had not been weak the way they feared. It had been a conduit, its flexibility channeling the wind's small pushes into a feedback loop that grew faster than any material could bleed away. Aeroelastic flutter, a coupling of air and motion, a self-exciting song that feeds beyond what a structure can shed. That understanding, bought with $6 million and one dog's life, became the foundation every long-span bridge stands on now. Yet towers grow taller, decks grow thinner, and the wind remains patient. The physics didn't change, the bridges did,